Have you ever looked at the world and wondered, what is God doing? Perhaps you've asked the question while reading the news. Perhaps you've asked it while watching conflict unfold between nations, hearing about economic uncertainty, witnessing political division, or seeing the effects of poverty and injustice in our city. Perhaps you've asked it while looking at the church and wondering about its future. What is God doing? It's not a new question. In today's gospel, Jesus tells a parable that begins with a field. A farmer sows good seed. Everything begins well. But during the night, an enemy comes and sows weeds among the wheat. As the plants begin to grow, the servants notice the problem. The field is not what it should be. And immediately they ask the question many of us would ask, do I want to go and gather the weeds? In other words, shouldn't we fix this? Shouldn't we clean this up? Shouldn't we do something immediately? The servants want a quick solution, but the farmer says, no, let both of them grow together until the harvest. The answer feels uncomfortable. We all want resolution. We want clarity. We want the weeds gone. Yet Jesus describes a reign in which wheat and weeds grow side by side. Good and evil, beauty and brokenness, compassion and cruelty, hope and despair, they all exist together. And perhaps that is one of the hardest truths of faith. We often imagine that God, if God is truly present, the weeds would disappear. But Jesus tells us otherwise. The reign of God is not a weed-free field, at least not yet. The reign of God, God's good seed growing faithfully in a field where weeds remain. Psalm 37 speaks to this same reality. Do not fret because of the wicked. I get it. It's easier said than done. The psalmist understands how tempting it is to become consumed by worry. We see injustice prosper. We see selfishness rewarded. We see those who exploit others appear to succeed. We see systems that seem designed to benefit some while leaving others behind, and we fret. The Hebrew word behind fret, titshar, carries the sense of burning, becoming heated, allowing anxiety and anger to consume us. The psalmist knows how easy it is to let our attention become entirely on the weeds. Yet the repeated invitation throughout the psalm is remarkably simple. Trust in God. Take delight in the Lord. Commit your way to the Lord. Be still before the Lord. Again and again, the psalm redirects our attention, not away from the reality, but towards God, because what we focus on shapes us. If we focus on the weeds, we may become cynical. If we focus on what's broken, we may lose our capacity for hope. If we focus only on what is wrong, we may forget that God is still at work, and God is still at work. One of the gifts of spending time with children is that they remind us of this. As you may know, I begin the day listening to the CBC radio news. I like to know the big things happening in the world, just 10 minutes of news. I try not to get too buried in it, as it can be overwhelming. It's been great this week, not starting the day with news, but starting with kids at camp. I got to be around their laughter, their imagination, their kindness, their curiosity, their resilience. As I reflected on this week's camp experience, I found myself thinking about God's field, because camp revealed both wheat and weeds. I saw evidence of deep brokenness, and I saw extraordinary hope. I saw children carrying burdens they should never have had to carry, and I saw children filled with possibility. I saw the consequences of systems that too often place profit above people, and I saw generosity. I saw pain, and I saw joy. The field contains both. And yet what struck me most was that God's work continues. The weeds did not prevent the wheat from growing. The challenges did not erase the possibility. The brokenness did not extinguish the hope. Again and again, I caught glimpses of God's reign emerging in small but powerful ways. A friendship formed, a child encouraged, a leader offering compassion, a moment of prayer, an act of kindness, a burst of laughter, signs of community, seeds of God's reign. That is often how God works, not through dramatic interventions, not through immediate solutions, but through persistent acts of grace. One of the dangers of our age is that we can become experts at identifying the weeds. We know how to point out everything that's wrong. We catalog problems endlessly. We analyze decline, corruption, injustice, dysfunction. Now, don't get me wrong, there's value in naming what is wrong. Jesus himself names the weeds. But the goal of faith is not simply to become better weed inspectors. The goal is to become people who bear the fruit of God's reign. Notice that the farmer's concern is not ultimately the weeds. His concern is protecting the wheat. The servants want to spend their energy uprooting. The farmer wants to preserve growth. Perhaps that is the word the church needs today. There's no shortage of reasons to worry. There's no shortage of things demanding our outrage. There's no shortage of voices telling us that everything is falling apart. But Christ calls us to something deeper than anxiety. Christ calls us to faithfulness, to keep planting, to keep nurturing, to keep loving and serving, to keep trusting that God's work is larger than what we can see. Psalm 37 reminds us, trust in the Lord and do good. Notice that the psalm does not say trust in the Lord and do nothing. It says trust in the Lord and do good. Trust is not passive. Trust becomes action. Trust feeds hungry, visits the lonely, advocates for justice, welcomes the immigrant, mentors children, builds community, keeps showing up. Trust continues sowing seeds even when the harvest is not yet visible. The promise of Jesus' parable is not that the weeds win. The promise is that God remains the Lord of the harvest. The future belongs to God, not to greed, not to violence, not to fear or despair. The future belongs to God. And because the future belongs to God, we are free to live with hope. Hope grounded in the conviction that God's reign is already growing among us. Hope grounded in the belief that every act of kindness matters. Hope grounded in the assurance that God's grace continues to work in places we cannot yet see. Hope grounded in the resurrection itself. I get it. The field is messy. The weeds are real. But so is the wheat. So is God's reign. So is God's promise. So as we go out into the world and into our communities, perhaps the question is not simply whether we can see the weeds. Most of us can see them clearly. But the question is this: can we see that the wheat that God is growing among us is still there? Can we see the wheat? I invite you into a few moments of silence, listening to the Holy Spirit stir in your body, mind, and